Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Special in-studio guest, Matt Taibbi. Matt, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Nice to see you.
Great to see you, and of course, reading all your stuff in the Rolling Stone. And first of all, just a quick question. I mean, you're writing all these stories about banks and what's going on Wall Street, but are you writing about finance, or are you writing about crime stories, basically?
It's funny, the lines have gotten so blurred. It's basically an organized crime story, and that's what I'm trying to do lately, is just convince readers that it's not really an economic story or a finance story. It's organized crime. There's no difference at all.
Yeah, I mean, the language that people use, the bankers, it sounds so highfalutin, and they use these credit default swaps and derivatives and collateralized debt obligations, but they could just as well be talking about, you know, whacking a guy behind the dumpster at Sparks.
Totally.
Essentially, it's the same thing. So you write, gangster banks keep winning public business. So they're in the business of doing the business of the public, in essence, and even though they're clearly violating the law, they're continuing to get these contracts. So tell us about it.
Yeah, and this is an example where it's exactly like the old mafia business. In the old days, we had municipal bid rigging, and it was a mafia group that would prey upon some local municipality, and the different mafia groups would divide up between each other which town they got to service their garbage, who got to service the laundry here, who got to do this and that, the cement, the construction. And that's exactly what we have with modern investment banking. All these investment banks have essentially divided up their territory. They are artificially lowering their bids for investment banking business. So a town goes out and it wants to issue a bond, and all of the banks, all of them, the usual suspects, Bank of America, Chase, they're all colluding to submit artificially low bids, and everybody's losing out, and it's exactly the same activity that we had with mafia groups. It's just that it happens to be bonds instead of garbage.
Well, or junk bonds, as they're called. Garbage bonds, right?
Exactly.
So now another interesting aspect of this is that the mob has gone global, the Wall Street mob, and you see in Casino, Italy, there's a big story recently, and you've covered this extensively.
Yep.
So a couple of highlights there. We can give the globalization of this.
Absolutely. That's one of the problems with prosecuting this kind of crime, is that it's so cross-territorial and cross-jurisdictional that there's no one law enforcement body that can really aggressively prosecute this kind of crime. And they also have a tendency to go regulatory shopping. Essentially, they seek out the areas where the regulations are the weakest, or the regulators who are the weakest, and that's where they'll base their operations so that the laws are less powerful. So it's very, very hard to nail them down for things like these swap manipulations, or the really big story, I think, that hit this year is the manipulation of LIBOR, which is this new burgeoning case that's coming out, and nobody really knows where they're going to prosecute that case. Yeah,
that story, and I don't know if you followed this one or not, but Bank of New York was caught in a multi-trillion-dollar custodian business for pensions and whatnot. They were stepping in front of all the trading, the forex, and just scalping the pennies, billions and billions. And now they're saying, well, we're not sure we can prosecute that story.
That's like Office Space, that movie, right? Exactly. One penny at a time, but you do it a million times, right?
Well, now that's an interesting. Now, Rolling Stone, of course, is a pop culture magazine, and you go back to the Hunter S. Thompson days, the coverage of the politics of the '60s and the Nixon, and there you are, you're in the magazine, and the writing is different than you're going to find in the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, because you bring in a real literary sense to it. It's great to read, even if you're not interested in the details of the stories. It's well written. Right. So as a writer, what are the challenges? It's kind of a bit of a tangent story, but I've always wanted to ask you this. As a writer, when you're talking in this space, because the material is so opaque, and the crimes are, when you talk about inflation, it's a crime that no one is really aware of happening. It's creeping.
Right. It's all around you.
How do you deal with that? I mean, as a writer, as a journalist, and go through your thought process on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated and challenging, because and this is part of the reason that these guys get away with as much as they get away with, because the instant you try to explain some of these crimes, you can't do it in 1,000 words. You can't even do it in 3,000 words. It takes sometimes 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 words to explain how manipulation of the municipal bond market works, or what AIGFP was doing before the crash, all those things. So the first thing that I try to do always is I try to connect the activity to a real world consequence. So I'll find somebody who actually ended up losing money, and then I'll try to sort of connect that consequence to the crime. So for instance, in Jefferson County, Alabama, you start